Welcome to Grandma's YouTube channel. How are you? I'm so happy that you've come to see what I've got to say today. The first thing I wanted to talk about is my hair. I got it cut this week and it's all short and prickly and I love it so much. The second thing is up on my doorway, just over there, I've hung all of these little crystals. Some of these crystals I've had since the old house and some are new because Pappy bought me one, and I've hung them up, and today it's sunny even though it's cold because it's winter time now, but it's very sunny, and when I wiggle them I get all sorts of rainbows and spectrums all over the house. If you look in the very back corner, sort of about there, you can see one little dot on the wall. You can't see it properly, but that's a spectrum from the prisms, the crystal prisms I've got up here, and the light goes through it and makes all rainbows all over my walls and the floor and the benches, and that just brings me so much joy. And they made me think of fairies because they're kind of like magic, the way the rainbows are everywhere all over my house. So I thought maybe today I'd tell you a little story about our favourite fairies. So once upon a time there was a little boy called Millamoo Magic Bruce Freeland, and he lived with his mummy and his daddy and his beautiful puppy dog called Bodhi. And as we know, he had two little fairy friends living in his playroom. There were also, right across the other side of the world, two little girls. One called Gracie Bella Jellybean and one called Ava Rosie Posy. And they had two houses with their mama and their papa, and in those houses was a whole fairy fancy with lots and lots and lots of fairies. But they had their very special favourites, as did Millamoo Magic Bruce Freeland. Miller's sort of favourite fairy was called Elvis. He got up to all sorts of mischief. Grace's favourite fairy, her name was Belle, and she was just like Elvis, an absolutely twin trickster. And Ava Rosie Posy's favourite little fairy was called Blossie, and she was only new. She'd just gotten her wings and her fairy wand, and she was getting better and better at magic. And Ava Rose had had a sneaking idea that Blossie's secrets were all to do with nature and to do with flowers and everything that grows. She wasn't so much of a trickster, was Blossie, but she was maybe a little bit sometimes when Ava Rose felt like being cheeky. Anyway, we'll see what happens. This particular morning, Millamoo Magic Bruce Freeland was woken up by a little fairy sitting on his nose, a little foot either side sliding over and wiggling in his ear, and then on the other side a wiggling in this ear. Little tiny fairy fingers opening his eyes like this. Oh, Elvis, said Miller, that has to be you. It's dark, it can't quite be morning. Elvis said, Miller, would you like to go on an adventure? Remember you went on an adventure with Pip and me and Andy and all of the fairies and your cousins? Why don't you and I go on an adventure today? Said Miller, I'm not sure that you're the best choice for an adventure. And he goes, oh, Miller, come on, it'll be so much fun. I've heard that your cousins have got 3 new things living in their house and I want to see them. Come on, let's go by fairy magic. We can go and no one will even know that we're gone because fairy time, we'll be back before any time has really gone in the real world. Miller said, oh, I don't know. Just you and me, Elvis, are you sure? Elvis said, yeah, come on. It'll be so much fun. I know how to fly you over there with fairy flying. Miller, who had decided to be very adventurous, thought to himself, all right, so long as you promise me, Elvis, that there'll be not too much mischief and that we can get home before any real human time is gone. Elvis said, okay, I can do that, I'm sure. So Elvis unrolled his green, sparkly, translucent wings, put on his pointy little shoes and his green little fairy outfit while Miller got himself dressed. As Miller was putting on his clothes, he knew to dress nice and warm because flying can sometimes be a little bit chilly. He was putting on his coat, his jumper and his coat, when they heard a noise. And Miller said, that sounds like one of my mummies or my daddies. Are they waking up? Uh-oh. And just as Miller was putting on his boots, Elvis said, come on, I'll quickly have a look. You put on your boots. And Elvis went out. There was a small kerfuffle. And as Miller walks out his bedroom door, he feels a wiggle and a squiggle in his coat. Was there anyone there? Elvis said, no, everything's good, I think. So Miller and Elvis flew all across Sandy, across the sea, and all the way over to Amsterdam and out the other side of Amsterdam. On the end of Ava Rose and Grace's bed, plonked Miller and Elvis. This was unusual. Usually it was the two girl cousins waking up the boy cousin with the fairies. But this time it was Miller and Elvis waking up his girl cousins. Elvis started to flap his little wings, and all of a sudden, corner of his eye, Miller saw a little blue fairy and a gorgeous sparkling rainbow fairy. It was Belle and it was Blossie. They'd come to join. Said Belle, Elvis, it's so good to see you, my little twin trickster. And Blossie said, oh, what is going on here? And with that, Blossie slid onto Ava Rose's nose and Belle slid onto Grace's nose, and there was little feet poking in each ear and little fingers, little fairy fingers, opening the girls' eyes. Shh, said Belle. Shh, said Blossie. Girls, wake up. Look who's here. So Grace and Ava Rose, sleepy as can be, What, Belle? What, Blossie? They sat up and there was Miller on the end of their beds. Come on, said Miller. I hear you've got 3 things that have happened in your backyard and I want to know all about them. Grace and Ava Rose quietly snuck away, got out of their pajamas and into their coats and their boots and their jacket. Just at that moment, they heard a noise. Oh, said Ava Rose, I think that's my mummy. I think that's my mama. I think she can hear us. Belle and Blossie said, I'll go and check. You girls keep getting dressed. And Elvis went with them too. So the 3 little fairies went back into upstairs to have a look and see. And all of a sudden, Ava Rose felt a little and a squiggle in the back of her jacket. The 3 fairies came fluttering back down and they said, Belle said, it's all good, it's all good. And Belle and Elvis exchanged a look. What could that mean? And then Blossie sort of went a bit red in the face. Okay, let's go out and see. So they went outside and in the garden, it was beautiful. There were so many flowers and plants and a beautiful pond that had so many tadpoles and so many frogs. Blossie was showing Elvis. Elvis waved his magic wand and a couple of tadpoles, poof, turned into tiny, tiny, tiny little frogs. Oh my goodness. Elvis, said Blossie, that's too quick. They're not quite ready to be frogs yet. Elvis said, oh well, they have got their legs now and they've lost their tail, so they have to be tiny frogs. And as they walked further, Ava Rose and Miller felt a squiggle and a squoggle, and out of the back of their jackets came a teeny tiny daddy, and out of Ava Rose's jacket came a teeny tiny mama. Elvis, Belle, Blossie, said Ava Rose. Oh, said Blossie, I wanted to tell you, Ava Rose, but when we went and saw your mama, she was waking up, and before I could stop him, Elvis waved his magic wand and shrunk your mama down really, really tiny. Ava Rose had a look. Grace came running over to have a look. Oh my goodness, she said, you've shrunk my mama. The girls looked at each other and looked at their tiny, weeny little mama. Uh-oh, what is going to happen? Miller said, oh, girls, this has happened to me before, where Elvis shrank my daddy and he was out in the back garden and had so much trouble unshrinking my daddy. But lucky, the magic is so amazing that my daddy couldn't remember that he got shrunk. But his little hat got shrunk and Elvis forgot to make it big again, and my daddy was holding this tiny little hat and he was thinking, how on earth did my tiny little hat get shrunk? And while they were doing that, Miller felt his daddy with his arms on his hips going, where am I? Why am I here? With his tiny little squeaky voice, because the little daddy had been shrunk this big and the little mama had been shrunk this big. Rachel looked at David and said, hello. And David looked at Rachel and said, hello. What are we doing in Amsterdam? Oh my goodness. Rachel said, I really don't know. 1 minute I was sound asleep in my bed and the next minute I'm here on my little girl. Well, I'm going to have to call her a giant now because I'm really tiny and Ava Rose is huge. And look at Grace. She's massive. With that, little daddy, David, and little mama, Rachel, ran down their children's bodies and landed on the ground. Oh, well, said Rachel, tiny, tiny little Rachel, since you're here, come and I'll show you my garden, she said to David. She showed David, and the children in the background are going, oh no, what if we lose our daddy and our mama? And with that, the cheeky little tiny David and Rachel scampered off over the garden to look in at the pond. Grace said, kids, come on. What are we going to do? What if our mama or Uncle David falls into the pond? It'll be so deep for them. We'll have to keep an eye on them. So quickly the children scampered over to see if they could find their parents who had gone missing next to the pond, and they saw a few little grass stems wiggling, and they looked. Grace said, kids, stop, Grace, Ava Rose, Miller, everyone, stop. If we walk too hard, what if we squashed our parents? That would be no good. And the next minute, they saw two little heads running around to the chicken coop. Oh my goodness. Grace looked at Elvis and looked at Belle and at Blossie and said, oh no, they're running into the chicken coop. These parents are out of control. What if the chickens chase them and peck them, thinking that they're bugs or worms? By the way, we've got 3 new chickens, Miller, and they're so cool. One is called Primrose, the other one's called Daisy, and I just love them all. They're so beautiful. Anyway, but it won't be good if the chickens eat our parents or chase them around. We better follow them. Walk carefully, With that, Blossie, who was always thinking, waved her magic wand and the children's legs lifted up just off the ground this much. So instead of stepping, they could kind of just walk in the air. Blossie whispered to Ava Rose, "Oh, Ava Rose, that's my solution so that you don't stand on your mama and Miller doesn't stand on his daddy." So the children, who did find it quite fun to be walking on air, it was sort of like being on a trampoline, but without the trampoline underneath, walked as fast as they could with a fairy on each shoulder into the chicken area, through the gate, looking around as hard as they could to see if they could find these naughty parents who had scampered off. Rachel couldn't wait to show her brother David all about the chickens and to tell him all about what was happening in her new home. David thought it was quite fascinating. He's not really necessarily one for chickens, but this whole adventure was quite fun and he was enjoying getting out of the house and doing lots of something new. So Rachel and David, inside the chicken coop, the chickens were still asleep. It wasn't quite morning time. Oh, thank goodness. So Rachel introduced her brother to each of the chickens. They looked like giant chickens. David did get a little bit nervous in his knees and did a little shaky, thinking, oh, if they wake up, I'd just be one mouthful for a chicken. Rachel said, oh, don't be silly, David. They won't eat you. And with that, one of the chickens opened a beady eye and turned around, looking at these two tiny little human beings, and thought to herself, is that a worm? Is that a mealworm? Is that something delicious to eat? And started to stretch its neck right over to the parents. With that, the three little children came in and saw their errant parents sitting there just as Primrose was going to have a little sniff and see what these tiny little people were. Just then, Grace, Ava Rose and Miller grabbed their parents' arms, tiny wee little parents, and said, put them on the palm of their hand and said, that's probably a little bit dangerous. We need to take you outside of the chicken coop. Rachel and David put their hands on their hips and said, who are the parents here, children? And the children said, I think right now we're in charge because you're tiny, wee, tiny. And you could get eaten by a chicken. You could fall in the pond and drown because it's really deep for you because you're tiny, wee. A cat could come along and think you're a mouse and eat you. So right now, we're in charge. You have to do what we say. And the children all looked at each other. Yes. And with that, they took themselves out of the chicken coop, put their parents down on the ground, said to these fairies, I think it is time for us to go home, Miller said. And I think it's time for our parents to come back to normal size. Elvis said, Miller, we can't make your daddy back to normal size till we get back to Australia and back to your house. But we can make Rachel back to normal size. Auntie Rachel. Miller said, okay, yes, that makes sense, Elvis. So with that, Miller picked up his daddy. He put him in his pocket. He made sure that there was plenty of room for air, but he also did up the button just in case his daddy wanted another adventure and wanted to escape. With that, Blossie waved her magic wand, gently and carefully. Zalazim, zalazar, and beautiful fairy dust flew out sparkling like rainbows over tiny little Rachel. And all of a sudden, Rachel, poof, back into her normal size. Blossie quickly hid behind Ava Rose's collar, and Belle hid behind Grace's collar. Rachel said, girls, it's still a bit dark. How did I get down here? Said Grace, I think you were sleepwalking. You're so excited about the chickens that I think you were thinking about them in your dreams, and maybe you came down to check them in your sleep, and we came down to take you back to bed. Oh, said Mama. Well, that is a strange thing. And with that, Grace and Ava Rose took a hand each of their mama and started to lead her back upstairs. Just before Miller left, he could hear his Auntie Rach saying things to the girls like, "Oh, this feels so strange. I feel like I had a chat with my brother David. I don't know, that's so odd. What an unusual, and I feel like I've got some chicken poo on my feet. How did this happen?" And with that, Elvis waved his magic wand and Miller and Elvis flew off all the way from the Netherlands back to Australia, doing a few loop-de-loops, because now that Miller was used to flying, he was quite happy for a loop-de-loop-de-loop-de-loop. Then they landed back in the front yard of Sandringham. And Miller quietly took off his boots, snuck himself inside, went into the playroom, tapped on the little tiny fairy door. "Andy, I need you." And out came Andy. Miller, Elvis, what have you been up to?" With that, Miller opened his little pocket and pulled out his teeny tiny daddy. And he said, "Andy, we've been on an adventure, but before I tell you all about it, would you mind making my daddy normal size again? He's been all the way over to the Netherlands and he's had an adventure with his sister, and I've had a big adventure. Could you please make him normal size?" So Miller put his daddy down on the ground, and Andy waved his magic wand, and the beautiful sparkling rainbow fairy dust fell down over the tiny wee little daddy, and the daddy grew back to full size. Oh, he was in his pyjamas. Well, actually, his jocks, because he doesn't wear pyjamas, and a t-shirt. And he said, "What am I doing in the playroom? I thought I was sound asleep in bed." Rachel? Is Rachel here? Grace? Ava Rose? "Oh, no, Daddy," said Miller. "You were just dreaming. Chickens? Do we need to get some chickens?" said Daddy, as he's rubbing his eyes all sleepy. Miller said, "Maybe we do need to get some chickens, Daddy." And he goes, "I don't know if I want chickens. Why am I thinking about chickens? Daddy, I think you better go back to bed and back to sleep." So Miller led Daddy by the hand, quietly and softly, back to his bedroom. Daddy hopped into bed and Miller tucked him in and gave him a little kiss on his forehead. "Good night, Daddy." "Chickens, Rachel, cousins," Daddy whispered as he was falling back asleep. Miller went back into his bedroom. Oh, thank goodness no time had passed. "Elvis, you had better go back home. I need to go back to sleep. That was a thrilling adventure." So Elvis and Andy popped back in behind the door in the playroom, and Miller snuggled up in his bed, smiling to himself about the adventure that he and his cousins had had that involved chickens and shrinking tiny little parents. And that's the end of the story. You'll have to let me know if you like that one. And next week, I think I'll do the hot dog story. If you want to, I think Miller's looking forward to that one, and I know that Ava Rose wanted that one to come second, so I'll do the hot dog story next week. Anyway, I hope you have the most marvellous week and enjoy those chickens and enjoy having lots of fun. Grandma loves you so much, so very much. I love you. Bye. Don't forget to give me a thumbs up and subscribe. Bye.